So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, there's so many conflicting trends in the energy industry right now. It reminds me of Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. On the one hand, it's the best of times. There's increasing demand for clean energy. The economics for customers are getting better. The equipment costs, like solar panels and inverters, those are coming down. We have much higher electric rates, which really sucks, but that means that people really need clean energy, solar solutions even more. And with the IRA, the incentives are bigger in a lot of different ways, including not only solar, but also heat pumps. On the other hand, it's the worst of times. We've experienced the first ever decline in rooftop solar installations in California, and I think that the numbers are going to be about flat for the U.S., no real growth. The growth of electric vehicles is slowing down, and not only because of cost, but because when the electric rates go up, the economics aren't as good. I kind of see how the incumbent fossil fuel companies have regained their mojo. Berkeley decided to not pursue their natural gas ban on new hookups. That was by the fossil fuel companies that we're not going to allow people to take the gas stoves out of their dying hands. So that's not going to happen. And that's not going to happen throughout the country. So there's not going to be these natural gas bans. And then from a supply standpoint, there's a lot of interest in solar storage transmission, but there's a huge backlog in these new energy projects. They just can't get built, or we have to be realistic. They're not going to get built in 2 years. They're going to get built in 10 years. And like nuclear, you're not going to build a nuclear plant for like 2 decades or more. So basically, because of these conflicts, more demand but less supply, it's increasingly clear that our electric grid's in a lot of trouble. We don't have the resources to affordably meet that demand. So kind of thinking about this, and I came across this gentleman, Jon Semingson, who's president of Peak Demand, and we started chatting about that, and he's done some research on this. Now, Peak Demand is a talent access firm, and because having talent in the right places is what we really need to meet our clean energy goals. John's been in the recruiting business for 16 years. And in his recent newsletter, he's talking about these infrastructure challenges, things like the human resources that our industry needs, things like financing, and specifically things like transmission and interconnection queues. So I want to have Jon on the show. Here he is. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Hey, thanks so much, Barry. Yeah, a lot of wonky stuff for sure, but it's all important.
Yeah, it's wonky, but if people don't know about the wonk, they get surprised and they kind of point the fingers not at the real culprits. So first, tell us a little bit more about your company, Peak Demand.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been working in the clean energy space for about 15 years now, really working nationally, being based out here in Roseville, Sacramento area. A lot of our work ends up being in California, but we do have a national footprint, primarily working within the, call it large commercial, community solar, utility scale markets primarily. We absolutely touch residential. It's not our bread and butter, but a lot of the manufacturing partners we work with are working a lot with residential integrators, installers. So even though we're not necessarily working with a lot of resi installers directly, it's a market that we're really attuned to as well.
Yeah, the resi installer business in most of the U.S. is doing okay. I mean, they're suffering a little bit because of financing. But in California, there's probably more supply of good HR resources than demand at that point. But yeah, what we're looking here, we're based in Silicon Valley, is there's some really good talent, and we're beefing up our team pretty effectively and very happy about that. But you kind of touched on it. There's 2 types of human resource shortages. One is the skilled construction labor, and the second is like the top-notch executive talent. Tell us a little bit about those distinctions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody knows that we've got an issue with skilled trades across the country. If you've tried to do any home remodeling or getting a contractor to come out to do anything, it's getting harder and harder, and prices are going up. And particularly acute when it comes to electricians, actually. There was a recent article, I think, in the New Yorker, that based on the folks retiring and aging out of the business and the lack of folks that are coming up that want to do skilled trades and be electricians, that in order for us to not only install, the solar, the energy storage on the utility scale, but even if you want to put an EV charger on your house, or you want to change that natural gas stove into an induction cooktop, it's really, really hard to find qualified electricians. And they're anticipating we're going to need something like 50,000 more electricians every year for the next 10 years to meet demand, which is just an insane number. So we definitely have some challenges around that. But if you look across like the big labor numbers, two of the hottest growing jobs in the country for the last 5 or 6 years have been wind technicians, so folks that are actually out there doing O&M tech for wind turbines, and solar installers. So these are all jobs that are major, major pinch points for the energy transition. On more, what I guess what we call executive level roles, certainly as we see the utility scale market, so the very large power generation projects, finding project managers, construction managers, engineers that can design, develop, and get these things moving and constructed. It's another area we just do not have enough people to do it.
Yeah, I feel the pain in two dimensions. One, both is a tremendous shortage of residential electricians in California, and that makes it very, very hard for a traditional solar company to get in installing batteries, because in order to install batteries, you need a very well-trained, experienced residential electrician. We could train the rooftop guys in a year or so, and they can be pretty productive, but it takes 10 years of residential experience or more to know how to do that. And then the other irony is, the electricians that may be out there, you tell them that, okay, well, thanks, you got to wire these things up, and they understand the Romex and the conduit and everything. But then you say, but then there's a 2-inch thick manual plus all kinds of electronic learning that are necessary to configure the systems. And a lot of them don't want to do that. So there's a huge shortage of talent. And to make matters worse, here in California, the utilities, particularly the IBEW, are trying to eliminate the C46 solar category, which would mean that only union-trained electricians could do that work. And I can tell you, as a fact, electricians do not like to go up on ladders. So you're not going to have electricians going up to the roof, and it will be almost impossible to find good battery installers. So we got challenges ahead of us.
Not to mention the cost of union electricians, right? If everybody you're going to hire is going to be a union electrician for even a residential battery storage project, it's a huge cost burden as well.
Yeah. And the new law in California starting January 1st, 2024 is that all commercial projects being sold have to be done at prevailing wage, which is basically union wage rates, which means that the little dentist that wanted to put 20 panels on the roof for their dental office is now going to have to pay union wages to do that instead of kind of the traditional trained solar electrician wages.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's the HR issues, but the other thing that's kind of hitting us the more worst of times is financing, which is so key to industry growth. But tax equity is under stress, and then you've got these direct pay programs, but the paperwork's out of control to get directly paid.
Yeah. I mean, we all know interest rates are up, right? Dramatically. Highest we've seen increases ever, I think is what it was. And that certainly has hit the residential market extensively. Luckily, utility rates have been rising at the same time, so it does make the economics a little closer. But certainly, as you're looking to finance these very, very large renewable energy projects, I mean, we're talking in some cases billions of dollars for some of these things. Interest rates increasing at this pace, it makes a dramatic difference in terms of the rate of return that folks are going to be getting. And then, tax equity, and again, getting a little wonky, but for a lot of these projects to work, you need to have a tax equity provider that has an appetite for these tax credits. And as the number of projects is outstripping the number of companies that have that level of tax appetite, you're seeing the available pool of capital shrink essentially. So tax equity providers are, number one, raising up their hurdle rates and asking for a little bit higher rate of return, which of course pinches project economics a little bit more. And they're also looking to kind of build some economies of scale by either going after larger deals or portfolios of deals that are bigger, which makes it a little bit harder for, call them smaller projects. They're still very big projects, but they're the kind of mid-size community solar distributed utility type of deals can have a little bit harder time. And then you brought up the direct pay piece. It took the Treasury so long to announce what the actual rules are and how to access the direct pay. We're finally starting to see a few of these transactions, but it's going to take a lot more time for the market to really get comfortable and understand the rules and the regulations around it.
Yeah, what struck me about a direct pay, it sounds really good, but the first time we specifically encountered it on a project that we installed, it was a little commercial project, and the customer wanted to take advantage of direct pay because it was a nonprofit. And everything was hunky-dory. We did the project, they'll get the credit. And then they started trying to figure out how to file for it. And I got an email from the customer. It was a 3-page long email, 3 screens of fine print of all the different regulations that they had to comply with. And some of these, I didn't even know what these government departments were, but they were asking for extra information. So it will not work for small customers, either that or the small customers are going to have to pay a consultant 10 or 20 grand to kind of figure all this out. But it's really kind of crazy. And unfortunately, we're seeing the same kind of misplaced financing efforts happen with the IRA. There's huge incentives for heat pumps and things like that. And our company's doing heat pumps too. But getting those incentives is extraordinarily complicated. So the money's out there. There are actually a lot of startups here in Silicon Valley that are kind of saying, hey, we're going to help you get the paperwork. But as one who's been filling out these utility and rebate forms for 25 years and automating that process, it's really, really hard to do on a scalable basis. So we'll see. It's the more worst of times. But I think that'll work out. We'll kind of internalize it. And as the economics continue to get better, project economics continue to get better because higher electric rates and lower equipment costs, we can handle higher interest rates, and which is just going to kind of be a reality. So let's talk about your recent observations on utilities' inability to meet our electric load growth.
Yeah, it's the first time that we've seen, dramatic utility load growth in 20 years, really. We've had relatively flat demand. And partly that's been manufacturing moving overseas and energy efficiency upgrades and all the things we've been doing to reduce electricity demand. But now as we have a ton of data centers coming in, you've got AI, you've got electric vehicles, all of these new load demands on the utilities. And the reality is that the current trajectory for load growth is about twice what the utilities have been planning for. So even though they were planning for, about a 2% growth, it's going to be a little bit more than double that. So we're looking at a shortfall of about 38 gigawatts of new electricity demand we're going to need over the next, I think it's 5 to 7 years. And the utilities were already struggling to increase the generation load. So it's going to be very, very challenging to figure out how we're going to power this energy transition.
What is the impact going to be on ratepayers? Utilities need to pay for that, and they do that with ratepayer funds. But then how fast are electric rates going to go up and how high?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer, right? I don't think anybody knows, other than if you're in California, I can guarantee you they're going to go up and go up and go up. I think PG&E has already gotten 24% rate increase this year. And interestingly, there are some proposals in front of the CPUC right now that are going to add fixed costs and try to change the rates around a little bit, but they'll find ways to monkey things around to make it better for them. But rest assured, as we have more demand than we have supply of electricity across the country, rates are going to go up. They just are.
Yeah, so 2 observations on the public-facing activities of the utilities when it comes to rates. First, they'll pick a statistic about how insignificant the rates will really go up, and they're going to say it's not going to be that bad. But then every time you look back in retrospect, it's way worse. And then what they're doing is that they're adding fixed charges. So they're going to say your kilowatt hour costs are going to go down. That's going to be the publicity. There's some rates right now that I think are 67 cents a kilowatt hour here in PG&E territory. So they're going to say it's going to go down. Great. But then you're going to have, I think they want an average of $20 a month fixed charges. So, that's $300 or $400 a year. It's going to be higher for other customers. The utilities are guaranteed by law to generate the same profits they expected. So whether it comes from fixed charges or higher rates, they're guaranteed to get that. And that's the mistake that the Public Utilities Commission keeps making, is that they kind of allow that to happen. And if the utility says, hey, we got to bury 10,000 miles of electrical wires and that's going to cost $3 or $4 million a year, then they're going to have to raise rates to cover that. It's guaranteed.
Yeah, I think the Public Utilities Commission's have forgotten about the public part of their code there.
Yeah. It's terrible what's happening there. So you mentioned the delays on transmission and interconnection queues. What are those? Yeah. What are the causes of those delays, and can we resolve those?
Yeah. So when we talk about kind of interconnection queues, for folks that probably don't do this stuff all day, every day like we do, if you're building a new generation project, a large one, you have to actually physically interconnect this power onto the transmission grid somewhere. And so there's usually a little bit of a land grab to try to find a place you can lease land to build one of these projects where you can interconnect to the grid because you have to find a spot where there's capacity. And so what ends up happening is developers and other power producers come in and they make an interconnection application into the utility or the ISO that is actually running that power market. In California, we've got CalISO, the California Independent Systems Operator. So what has happened over the last couple of years is that they have had like way more applications than they can even process. In fact, they just decided, I believe last month, that the California Independent Systems Operator is not going to review any new applications at all in 2024 because they're still dealing with backlog from 2022 and 2023. So they're getting more applications than they can process. One of the challenges around this, and the reason it happens, is that there's a lot of money to be made on these projects, and the cost to fill out an interconnection application is not exorbitant. So there's a little bit of a misalignment in terms of how to do this, but it's taken the utilities months or years to go through and try to figure out how can we integrate these new resources onto the grid. What's it going to cost to upgrade substations and to build transmission infrastructure? And the queues are so backed up, both in California as well as in PJM, which is the largest operator on the East Coast. They're not even accepting new applications for power. So we have this increased load demand. We're expecting another 38 gigawatts of additional electricity demand, and we can't even process the applications to start building the infrastructure we need for this power. It's just a whole disaster.
Yeah, and it sounds like processing the applications is something that's done, in an office somewhere with a bunch of, professionals. But building these transmission lines, let's say you put one out in the desert somewhere, you got to put wires from that location into, some local grid somewhere. And that's going to go over roads, over communities, around XYZ. And that's what takes so long. I mean, just the construction may take 2 years once they say we're going to do it, but it's taking 8 to 10 years just to get permission for those power lines. So that's almost an insurmountable obstacle. The second thing is, all right, so let's say these things don't go in. There's a lot of power capacity, old power capacity, fossil fuel power capacity, more localized. Here in San Jose, we got the Metcalf Energy Center. It's in South San Jose. But the plan is to decommission that at some point. And because we'll be powering it with renewables, but we'll never get the renewables built in time. So all those old fossil fuel plants and nuclear plants, they're going to just continue to be running until these new wires get installed, which is a decade or more away.
Yeah. And in some cases, these plants are not economical, right? I mean, not only are they polluting, but a lot of them are very old. They require upgrades and they're not super cost effective to run. I mean, new renewables, solar has been the cheapest form of new generation for the last several years. So, there's very real implications economically.
Yeah. And when you say that they're not economical, there's much cheaper ways to do it. But then if the utilities say, hey, we're going to keep them running, we got to pay for all that maintenance. Oh, sorry, it's expensive to buy gas. We're going to have to buy the gas. Now we have to put in scrubbers. They make more money on that. So they make money either way. And it's just amazing how that's happening. Well, so obviously, I usually wear a distributed generation hat. I don't have a hat on right now, but it's generated half of the power in California on a clean energy basis. And because of the new state policies that happened with the net billing tariff, and that's decimated residential, how they've changed the commercial rules. You can't do virtual net metering. You can't do net metering aggregation, which basically means apartment buildings can't get solar because it's way out of whack economically. And even though we passed a new community solar law last year, California is still at the bottom of the pack when it comes to community solar because the utilities have process delays that are built in that prevent it. So it's, once again, anywhere where you can put an energy generation plant closer to the customers, they've walled that off. What's going to happen when supply doesn't meet demand? Are we going to go back to gas cars and slide rules instead of AI?
I think you're going to find some of these companies have to get a little more creative. And, I've talked to a few organizations that are starting to develop, full microgrid island data centers and different things like that. So you might see some of that stuff start happening. But, ultimately, when demand outstrips supply, what happens? We've seen power outages in the past. I'd love to believe that we're not going to have another Enron-style rolling blackout situation. But, I mean, if it gets bad enough, it absolutely could happen, right? But if nothing else, you're absolutely going to see prices continue to rise.
Yeah, the prices are going to go up. That's kind of the natural thing that's going to happen. I feel like the whole state is like a frog in a pot of water that's starting to boil slowly, and we're going to get clobbered there. In the meantime, the utilities are following the rules and making a ton of money. All right. Well, let's kind of
following their rules that they got to build themselves, right?
They're following their rules. And, specifically one of the things that really irks me when we did the research last year, we kind of disclosed that we did this with the Solar Rights Alliance and CALSA. The utilities and their unions donated $25 million to the state legislators and the governor, and that's why the PUC was changed and kind of created all these new regulations that stopped residential, commercial, multifamily, community solar. There's a bill in the legislature that basically would prevent utilities from using ratepayer money, the money that you and I pay when we pay our electric bills, for lobbying, basically for lobbying in any way. Now, they can still lobby, but they have to use the interest that they earn on our money, which is, one step away. Hopefully that'll go through, but the dilemma is they'll spend $40 or $50 million fighting that so they can keep doing it. So we'll see.
Against my better judgment, I'll say I am a little optimistic based on some of the meetings we had at the most recent lobby day with legislatures in Sacramento. Like, they were much more receptive to the plight of distributed generation than they've been the last few times we've been out there. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was a great timing. Bernadette Del Chiaro and CALSA did a great job because they timed it just like right after people are freaking out about much, much higher electric rates. And the legislators, even the ones that were voting on behalf of the utilities, are starting to say, this is really hurting the economics of my constituents. I'm supposed to be representing them. So we'll see what happens. Fingers crossed. Everybody, as you know, everybody in the solar and storage and clean energy industry, we're optimists. So we're stuck here and we're going to kind of see it through. Eventually we will win, but it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've been in the solar industry a long time. So what else do you do? What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? I really like being outdoors and just doing stuff. I end up traveling quite a bit. I love hiking. You find me outside doing something most of the time.
Yeah. Where do you go hiking?
There's a couple of places up near Auburn that I really, really like, going up off the American River. There's a handful of trails out that way, up towards Tahoe as well. Anywhere really.
Yeah. Have you done the river rafting on the American River?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We've done the lazy float kind of on the south end of the river. Actually, this summer I'll be taking my teenager up where we want to do the kind of the whitewater side out of Coloma this year. I think we're going to do that.
Yeah. I've done it a few times. We had a group, my family group went last year. Unfortunately, my wife got COVID at the time, so I sat it out while my kids went with our friends, and which was good because she doesn't even know how to swim, so she was just hold on to me and I'll wear a jacket. But that is absolutely a blast. And I'm the same way. I like to get out there and hike and bike, and not so many water sports anymore, but just it's terrific opportunities. And even when I was living on the East Coast, there's just tons of hiking trails and ways to get outdoors. All right.
Yeah.
How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. Or email me anytime, just jon@inpeakdemand.com.
And what's the URL for In Peak Demand?
It's just www.inpeakdemand.com.
All right, great. Well, terrific. Thanks for joining us on the show, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you missed any of today's show, you can always go to the Energy Show website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.